Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Well, hi, Fahrusha, and here we are again.
Yes, Kate, here we are. Here we are at Shattered Reality, and today is May 9th, 2017. Got to slate that time and place.
Okay.
And we have a really, really very, very interesting show. We love to present edge science here on Shattered Reality because that's what our podcast is really all about, is edge science. And this is a subject which is of particular interest to me, and I've written a number of kind of layman sort of thoughts about the study of panspermia, as you know, on my blog, and we've discussed it a little bit on the webcast here. So who do we have today?
We have Dr. Milton Wainwright.
Well, Professor Milton Wainwright,
Okay.
Ph.D.
Ph.D. is a doctor.
Of the University of Sheffield. I think that they title things differently over there in the UK, but
I see.
That's who we
My
have
apologies.
today. And he has been a person who has worked with one of my favorites, Chandra Wickaramasinghe. So we have him here on a Skype line right now. What would you like to? How would you like to be spoken to? How shall we call you today?
Yeah, just call me Milton. Yeah,
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, that's a very friendly answer, and thank you, because our podcast is very conversational. So
Good, excellent.
let me
Good.
start.
It's 10 in the evening to me, so I may be a little bit drowsy.
Oh, I hope not. We're sorry to keep you up, but we're absolutely thrilled to have you on the podcast. Absolutely thrilled.
Pleasure to be here, yeah.
You started out as a botanist. You were a small town or semi-rural young man in a town in Western England in the UK. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was brought up in a coal mining village in South Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. And I was very interested in natural history as a kid. I used to roam the fields and looking for insects, caterpillars, and flowers and things. And I had the great privilege to go to university to study botany. That was way back in 1968. So from then I became a microbiologist studying bacteria.
Well, with a background like that, it's no wonder that you expect life forms to exist other than on this planet. I mean, look at the plethora of life forms you find just in a small walk through the woods.
Or in a drop of seawater or lake water, I guess.
That's right. I used to take little drops of pond water and look at the paramecium, the amoeba, and so on. And so I was really hooked from a very early age, and I've kind of been a biologist all my life, really.
Well,
strangely,
go ahead.
Because I suppose from a coal mining community, not many kids were interested in these things, but I seem to naturally gravitate to natural history.
I was just wondering, did you ever note of any fossils in any of the coal that came out?
In fact, I have a couple of these. I didn't see any. In fact, I did. I tell fibs. I saw a few ferns when we were kids. When we used to burn the coal, of course, locally. And I can remember seeing some large ferns in the coal, yeah.
And the coal dated back to God knows when, so really, even then. I mean, this planet, if you had looked back 350 million years ago, you would have thought you were on an alien planet. It was so different.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, so you have quite a background in just the wide dispersion of various life forms.
And I think that as we get into the podcast, your familiarity with these very tiny microbial and submicrobial life forms, it begins to play very importantly in your story. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What I would like to do is to talk about, first of all, exactly what panspermia is and how that differs from another term, which is panpsychism, that everything is conscious in the universe, including stars. So I think that panpsychism is what drew me initially to the idea of panspermia. So could you give us an expert's view on what exactly panspermia and neopanspermia are?
Yeah, right. I don't know about the other term, about being consciousness, but panspermia is a very straightforward idea. Most scientists believe that life on Earth began here, that chemicals got together in a warm pond, as Darwin would say, and these chemicals got together to make proto-life, early life, and then this early life became microbial and then evolved into humans, and so on. We all know this story. This is called the chemical theory of evolution. Now, people who are interested in panspermia say, well, this didn't happen on Earth necessarily. It could have happened here, but the main source of life was from outer space, that organisms or proto-organisms came from elsewhere, and they were continually coming in all the time, but obviously the Earth was too hot. Now, as soon as the Earth cooled, then these organisms could develop on Earth and spread, multiply, and then they evolved into the full range of life on Earth. So basically it's saying that life came from space.
Okay. But microbial sorts of life, we're not speaking here of fully developed aliens or anything.
No, we're not talking about aliens now. We're talking about a straightforward scientific theory.
But it just sort of begs the question, though, doesn't it? Because, I mean, whether life began here or somewhere else, it still began. And
that's an interesting philosophical point, you know. The human mind is wired to think in terms of beginnings and ends. Mm-hmm. So quite naturally, we think of life must beginning. Mm-hmm. Now, it may well be that life was eternal. Now, I don't want to be... This is not a religious notion. It's a philosophical notion that maybe life always was. But we can't kind of get our minds around that because we think of being born, dying, getting married, getting divorced, starting a degree. We're hardwired to think in terms of beginnings and ends. Mm-hmm. So it's almost impossible for us to get around the idea that life may always have been. But that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, that is a possibility by all means. And just to clear up what I meant by panpsychism for those listeners, and something to the effect that many of the quantum physicists maintain, especially Max Planck, who said basically consciousness is fundamental. You can't get behind consciousness. And there are people out there, including some astronomers, I believe, that think that heavenly bodies, such as neutron stars, might have a form of consciousness. And of course, that this is a philosophical notion. Besides that, that is very akin to animism and on Earth, people who believe in animism. So just to clear that up a little bit.
Sure. I guess to a regular kind of scientist, although I'm kind of a bit of a heretic, I guess that would be, quite left field, as you say over there. But panspermia is a very straightforward scientific concept. It's not to do with aliens or anything kind of complex like that.
No.
So basically, we're just saying that life came. Now, neopanspermia is a term that I coined, saying that not only did life come and originate from space, it's coming all the time. So as you step outside the door this evening or whatever, all day long, you will be potentially covered in microorganisms from space. And this is what we've concentrated our research on, this idea of neo meaning new, of course, so that life is coming in all the time, not just that it originated, but it's coming in all the time.
Good. Well, listen, the question that I want to raise, or the point that I want to make, is that my personal interest in panspermia came a long time ago. I guess it was in the 90s when somebody who you have worked with, Chandra Wickaramasinghe, when he was talking about the red rain that fell on parts of India and in the Indian Ocean. Can we go to a little bit to that and your interactions with Dr. Wickaramasinghe?
Fine. Chandra was working with Fred Hoyle way back in the 70s, in fact. In fact, at that time, they were publishing most of their papers in the major scientific journal Nature. And this was a new idea, and people were quite open to the idea. As time went by, they produced more and more evidence, but paradoxically, it became less and less fashionable. So they really had to work over the last 20, 30 years to kind of get this idea accepted by scientists. Now, I never met Fred Hoyle. Fred Hoyle, of course, a famous astronomer, mathematician, should have got the Nobel Prize, but was denied it. I never actually met him, although I heard him give a lecture in Sheffield many years ago. But Chandra and I have been working now for about 17 years, because I first started working with Chandra just after 2000, I think. And basically what happened was very interesting. I'd been lecturing on panspermia to my students and taken an interest in it, but I assumed that Chandra would have all the microbiologists he ever needed because people would be interested in this fantastic idea. So I never contacted him, but I wrote a letter. There was a lot of criticism of his work and Fred Hoyle's work. I wrote a letter to a scientific journal saying, this guy's, extremely intelligent. The idea of panspermia is very scientific, etc., defending the idea. And to my amazement, Chandra emailed me and said, would you like to work with me?
Cool.
Now, I said, wow, to my mind, every microbiologist in the world would want to do this. But he said no, basically because of the question of their career, etc., their status. They didn't want to get involved in this. It was too off the wall, too kind of alien associated and so on. So I was more than delighted to go down to Cardiff where he was working and joined his team. And we worked now for 17 years or more.
Well, that's fantastic. I have not only have admiration for what you're doing, but I have enormous admiration for both Sir Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickaramasinghe. Now, Sir Fred Hoyle, wasn't he the royal astronomer at one time?
I don't think he was, but he was extremely. Was he extremely royal? I can't. I honestly don't know that, but he was certainly very eminent. A very eminent science fiction writer, of course, as well. Wrote the book The Black Cloud, which can still be read and enjoyed today. So Fred Hoyle was a genius beyond all doubt. Now, Chandra has been working on this idea now for best part of 20 or 30 odd years, and he's come in for a tremendous amount of ill-informed criticism, even racism. He comes from Sri Lanka, and he's shown me letters of abusive kind of interaction. God knows what he gets on the internet because these were letters.
Well, that's terrible.
It's a lot of trolling and so on and so forth. Very nasty racist comments because, of course, panspermia is very badly placed in the sense that it attacks, or it seems to attack, religion and science, or at least Darwinism. Right? So the Darwinists don't like it, and the extreme religious people don't like it. So you're bang in the middle, and you get a lot of criticism from either side.
Well, your work is in the last recent years, has been very, very clever, very wonderful ideas that a person could do without a lot of money, I understand.
Yeah, that's right.
And it involves weather balloons. And if I were to say in very plain language, you send something like a disk drive in an envelope which is impermeable until it reaches the stratosphere up on a weather balloon, at which point it opens up and reveals something like a petri dish, and then the organisms are captured, and then it's
almost.
Go ahead.
Sorry, almost there, but not quite.
Okay, let us know.
Yeah, our initial work was done with scientists in India. Now, the Indians are very good at sending balloons into the stratosphere. They send massive balloons. We were sending massive balloons and massive payloads. And we were finding ordinary bacteria in the stratosphere. Now, for various reasons, we were kind of sidelined out of that work, basically because we couldn't find the funding in the UK to continue with the work. So I was at a bit of a loose end. And then I got an email from a friend of mine saying that within the University of Sheffield, in the engineering department of all places, there were 2 Ph.D. students who were making money out of a little business sending balloons to the stratosphere. Now, what they were doing, and they still do, is say you wanted to propose to your loved one, you could have a little proposal sent into space. It would be filmed, and you could show this at your wedding.
Oh,
He proposed to me in space. So
lovely.
you'd pay a couple $100 for this, and it's very a good way of making a little bit of money. So the students were doing this, and I got them into my office, and I said, "This is fantastic. Are you interested in sending these balloons to the stratosphere and doing a scientific study?" And they said, "Yeah, we're interested. Obviously, you'll have to pay us a little bit of money to cover the costs." So I did. And we then sat down and thought of an experiment. Now, I wanted it as simple and cheap as before, because the large balloons from India were costing us around about $750,000 per flight.
Oof.
Wow.
So you can see that was getting pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
So what we thought about, I don't know exactly thought about it, was we would make a box and put into this box essentially a CD drawer. And we could then open the CD drawer, as you say, in the stratosphere at any height we chose by GPS. And everything was sterile, of course. There's no point doing it if it's not sterile. And the drawer would open, and we put these little stubs, little kind of round objects, which we could then put into an electron microscope, a very high-powered microscope, directly. Now, anything that fell from the stratosphere onto the stubs, the drawer would close, and it would be contained within the box. So there was no way that you get contamination. It was all done extremely sterile. We would then take the box to a clean room where there's no microbes, there's no completely sterile. We'd open the box and we'd put the stubs into the microscope, and then we'd do a vision of the surface to see what was there.
And what did you find?
Well, let me admit that I kind of wasn't hoping to find very much. I thought, okay, I'll do this because it's there, as it were. And when I looked at my screen, the students brought this into my office, and I was just gobsmacked, absolutely. I just gasped with amazement, because here we had some very unusual organisms. Remember, before we'd been catching kind of ordinary bacteria, but here we had some very strange organisms. Now, I've been a microbiologist, biologist, I guess, for 40-odd years now. If you include my childhood, I suppose half a century, 50 years. I'd never seen anything like this, and believe me, I know my microbes after all that time. I'd never seen anything like it, and I was just absolutely amazed.
Oh, just a quick question. Did you do a control, send up a CD that didn't open and came back?
Yeah, we did it. We did that. We found ordinary kind of pieces of grass, pollen on the outside of the box. We always find that, but nothing inside. So the contents inside remained totally sterile on the control flight.
And when you say it was a differential, was that just shape, or was it morphology, or was it
shape? Slightly larger than bacteria, around about 10 to 40 microns, if anybody understands the kind of size differential, and very unusual shape. So we're talking about morphology. Now, the question is, how do we know they are biological? Because when we do this, we get a lot of cosmic dust. We get little bits of cosmic dust which are inorganic. They're made up of silicon, iron. And on the electron microscope, which can look at very small objects, we have a special machine called an EDX or an EDX, which we can put a crosshair onto the particle we're looking at, press a button, and get a total elemental analysis.
Oh, that's very good.
It's an amazing machine.
Mm-hmm.
The inorganic stuff comes up as I say, iron, calcium, any inorganic material, silicon, obviously. But when we do it on the biological particles, we only get carbon, oxygen, and a small amount of nitrogen. Now, that tells us these are organic, they are biological entities.
Just quick, hydrogen as well, right?
Yeah, but the machine won't detect hydrogen.
Oh, okay.
Oxygen and a little bit of nitrogen.
Okay.
It's not very good at detecting nitrogen either. So we know they're organic. We know they're not inorganic. Now, we also know they've got what we call bilateral symmetry. Now, this is very important in biology. You and I and all organisms, if you put a line through the middle of us, we have the symmetry on either side of us, right? All being well, of course. So you've got two arms, etc. And these are bilateral symmetry. So if you put a line down the middle of them, you get equal on either side. Now, that's very important because if this were organic fluff, I don't know, from your belly button or somewhere in the cosmos, then it would be kind of varied. It would not show bilateral symmetry. So this is why we know they're organisms and not just bits of fluff.
I was amazed by a picture that I saw, it may have been on your website, of a titanium vanadium sphere oozing and mucoid material. And I said, this is right out of a science fiction novel.
This was amazing. I mean, you can imagine how amazed I was when I saw this. When the edicts came up on that, it was, as you say, titanium mainly and a little bit of vanadium. But when we zoomed in closer, by the way, the students are Chris Rose and Alex Baker. I must mention their names because they do a lot of the very important actual experimental work. And when we zoomed in, we saw organic material on the outside, a bit like a kind of a woolly jumper, as it were. And that was exciting. But for some reason, and I don't know why, I just said to the students, is there any chance you can move the ball, the sphere, across? And we'll see what's behind it. I had no real understanding of why I said that, but I just said it. Now, these people work in an engineering department, and their microscopes are far better than the ones we normally use in biology. They're incredibly sensitive, etc. And they have another amazing machine. And this basically is a micro-manipulator. It's extremely thin, much thinner than the human hair, and using this, they could just move the ball across.
Wow. And
when they move the ball across, ooze, kind of gunge, came out of the ball to the side, and we edex that as carbon. So what we've got is a titanium ball with biology inside it and biology on the outside of it. And obviously, this is not heard of on Earth. It's just completely unknown, you know.
Sounds like an egg.
Well, one of the things I did say, and I had to say this for the sake of completeness, I don't necessarily believe it, but, you know, there's a theory of directed panspermia. You must have heard about this.
Yes.
This was the idea that aliens basically seed the cosmos with life. And if this were the case, this would make a perfect vehicle for sending life, because it's got a titanium sphere, which is protective, of course, and very durable. And this could do it. Now, I don't particularly kind of push this theory, because one of the problems is, apart from this, if it was sent by an alien civilization, you'd have to find the spaceship to find out, you know, how it was sent. And most scientists would kind of laugh at this idea, were it not for the fact that the main proponent of it was Francis Crick, of DNA fame.
Yes.
So Francis Crick came up with this idea, wrote a book about it, a few papers, and people took him seriously. Now, if I'd have come up with the idea, they'd still be laughing, of course, but when you win a Nobel Prize, people tend to
opens a lot of doors.
You, yeah.
Pay a little more attention, I guess. But let me ask you something. Now, I don't know everything, and you probably know more than me, but you don't know everything either. But in your experience, how would a titanium vanadium sphere form in nature, on the other hand?
Well, for example, they do have that on Earth, though. Foraminifera are one-celled organisms in the ocean.
Yeah, well, one of the suggestions I've made is that maybe the titanium spheres exist naturally anyway, and these organisms are acting like a hermit crab.
Yeah.
So the shell is natural, or it occurs wherever it occurs, and the organisms just get in there and use it as their home. Because it's difficult to imagine, well, of course, you don't know what you're talking about in terms of organisms, but it's difficult to imagine them laying down a titanium sphere like this, although nothing's impossible. So I suspect that maybe they're just using it as a passenger or a vehicle to move around. I don't know. These are just speculations.
Yes.
But then you'd have to speculate where titanium spheres exist, you know, and if there was some location in space where it was common, and then trace that back.
We obviously don't know a great deal about this, because we we're at the beginning of our studies, and no one else is joining in at the moment. So we're very much limited to what we can do ourselves. And, you can speculate until you're blue in the face, of course, but until we get more and more information, we won't know where they're coming from or what they are.
It's really distressing because really a long time ago I was interested in exobiology and everyone treated it as if it were UFOs. And then NASA started to call it astrobiology and suddenly it's a wonderful field. And
well, the problem with astrobiology now around the world is a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it is not devoted to looking for life in space. It's looking for life in extreme environments on Earth.
Right.
So people go to the Antarctic and they get money to do this. Well, it's not really related to space because space is going to be far more extreme than the Antarctic or whatever. So it's a good little bandwagon you can jump on. But the great thing about this is we're actually doing something at least away from the Earth in the stratosphere.
So what you... Go ahead.
Basically, what we're doing is we're hoping to catch things that are coming in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you need is some really great scientists in other places to replicate your studies. Is that the case?
That's exactly what we need. We need people to be open-minded. As I said, or you intimated earlier on, this approach costs relatively nothing. It's a few $1,000s, a few £1,000. Now, NASA spends $60 billion, I don't know, sending a lander to Mars. They could do this tomorrow. They have the technology. There's nothing complicated about it. They obviously have the money to do it. Most universities with an electron microscope and a balloon. We're talking about a cheap weather balloon, nothing expensive. Every scientist in the world, nearly everyone anyway, could be having a go at this. But we've heard rumors of the Japanese workers but as yet, no one is repeating it, which is quite amazing. I mean, what the hell are they doing?
Well, why don't you give your website name right now so that anybody who listens to this and has an interest, they may want to do it or talk to someone they know who can do it?
Yeah, well, it's M. Wainwright. I can't remember, actually, you've caught me, but the actual website address. But if you go onto Google and just put Milton Wainwright, you'll get a lot of the news and the input that, and I think that'll direct you to my website.
Because that'd be a perfect Ph.D. thesis. That'd be excellent.
Yeah, it would be very good.
Now, it would be fantastic for PhDs or scientists. Even if you had access to the microscope, the big requirement, you can collect the samples, but the big requirement is the electron microscope, of course. So theoretically, colleges could do it if they had a microscope and so on. Now, one important point I need to emphasize here. When we first published this, now, two points, in fact. We tried the top journals, and they wouldn't even open the envelope, as it were. So we had to use journals which are regarded not as kind of like Nature, etc. And this is one of the problems with doing exciting new work. It's often the case that the top journals won't entertain it. Now, this is not special pleading. This is the way of the world, right? Now, the other thing is that a lot of people said these organisms are coming from Earth. It was a total knee-jerk reaction because in our papers we explained why they're not coming from Earth. Now, the two reasons why main two reasons are, first of all, we can do, and other people have done this, we can do calculations, we can do modeling that says that particles bigger than 6 microns, so just keep in mind the number 6, anything bigger than 6 can't escape into the stratosphere at the heights we sample from. We're looking at organisms which are from 10 to 40 microns, so 6, 4. So theoretically, they can't escape into the stratosphere. Now, you might say, okay, well, your theories are wrong, your numbers are wrong, etc., etc. The clincher is this. We've done about 10 flights now, and on no occasion do we find any grass, pollen, or anything other than these microbes on the stubs. Now, if they were coming from Earth, you would expect them to be covered in all this material.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. You'd expect the organisms we're looking at to be in the middle of a mass of this stuff, because obviously there's so much of it on Earth. In fact, we might never see what we're looking at. But these organisms are occurring in pristine condition. They're on the stubs alone or in pairs. There's nothing around them. Now, unless there's a sieve, which is impossible, which takes out all the grass from Earth in the stratosphere and only lets our organisms through, they must be coming from space or from outside Earth. The other point is that the sphere you're talking about made an impact event on the sampler. It made a little crater. Mm-hmm. Now, you can't get a crater if you're being wafted up from Earth. The velocity is too low. It must be coming at speed from outside. So for these reasons, we're confident, and nobody's kind of argued against our theories. I mean, I give these talks all over the world, and I get the usual questions, and everybody says, oh, it's contamination. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the talk, no one can say, well, you know, I can shoot you down in flames. This is nonsense. I'd love it if somebody could tell us where we're going wrong, because I don't believe we are, but no one can shoot us down in flames. So I've said I've run out of money now, but I did say earlier on when I had some finance that I would go anywhere in the world to any meeting of scientists, of whatever, and they could shoot me down in flame, reduce me to tears, if they could, by explaining to us why we're going wrong. And we've done that. We've been to Sri Lanka, I've been to various other countries, in the UK a lot, and no one yet has shot us down in flames.
Well, two things here that come to my mind, and one thing is something that we started out with today in our introduction with you and your background. The other big thing is that these microorganisms that you are seeing, most of them don't occur on Earth, correct?
Yeah. Now, the answer to that, of course, is, well, we've just not seen them. So, you know, I mean, the criticism would be quite obvious. Well, you say you've never seen them, but maybe they come from a deep sea vent, you know, off on Jores, which nobody's found yet. So that's a good comment, but it could always be circumvented by a critic saying, well, we've just not seen them yet, and you just happen to have got them, you know.
Well, the other comment that I was going to say is that maybe your critics are victims of scientism, and they just say, well, it can't be, so that's why it's not true, because it can't be.
I don't really want to go into this, but we've had a tremendous amount of negative, not scientific negative criticism, but a lot of attacks on us, trolling, etc., and also from the scientific community in general. So, you know, I wanted people to attack us. I want them to do it scientifically. I want us, you know, I'm about to retire, although I continue doing this work, but I'm retiring from lecturing and so on. I'm 67 now. I'm getting a bit tired, but I will continue with this kind of work, obviously. But you know, I don't want to die thinking, well, you know, say I've got 20 years left. I'd like somebody to tell me exactly where we're going wrong, or tell me we're right, obviously. Now, I kind of fantasize that maybe, let's say I live until I'm 80, or 20 years hence or whatever, there may be a compendium. You know, we've found like 10 organisms. There may be this amazing compendium that they give to me, showing thousands of these organisms coming in, you know, that have been collected over the next 10, 15 years or so. So that would be tremendous.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Tremendous excitement, wouldn't it? In fact, it's very exciting to come towards the end of my career and to get this. You know, as a scientist, there's nothing more exciting than finding something new.
Absolutely, and I'm hoping that
although you pay for novelty by being attacked, you know, scientists, we get this impression of science. Well, we're given this impression of scientists being open-minded, etc., etc. But in fact, there's a lot of antagonism to new ideas, as you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I'm hoping that this podcast and other lectures that you've given inspire some person to replicate your findings somewhere around the world. Yeah. And I really can't see why they wouldn't do it.
Well, this is a very interesting point. Could I just mention another thing? Of course, people say, well, why is it important that these organisms are coming in? And, well, it's two things that people always say. First of all, why is it important? Well, one of the things it may be bringing in is new information. You know, evolution, we always think of, and this is why the Darwinists don't like this idea. They're so kind of stuck on the idea that information has come from within the biological community over the millions of years. What if information is coming out from out of space? What if DNA and organisms coming in. It will add new information to evolution. Now, so it opens up a completely new idea of biology. It's kind of exobiology, and it opens up our view of life in the cosmos.
Yes.
We're not just on this little rocky planet, rather. Now, the other thing is, people always say to me, are they going to kill us? Is this the end of the world? You know, some kind of B movie. And my simple answer to that is, well, they've been around longer than we have, and they haven't destroyed us yet. They're much part of biology as we are. So that of course, Chandra and Fred Hoyle suggested that diseases might come from space.
Uh-huh.
So there's a possibility of that. But
wasn't there a study a while back, before the 20th century, where somebody equated the passage of large comets through the center of the solar system with like flus that came about a few months later, up to a year later?
That's right. Well, from the year dot, people have associated comets with tragedies, with natural disasters. Halley's Comet, if you will, was associated with plagues and famines. And Fred Hoyle and Chandra came up with this idea that modern diseases like SARS and even possibly AIDS, come from space and mutate here, and they add new diseases. Now that really is kind of an extreme possibility, probably. I mean, if people don't believe in panspermia, the idea of viruses from space is going to be even more unbelievable. But it's an interesting possibility.
Go ahead.
Well, there's one other thing that ties into that, and I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. He's recently prematurely deceased, but he talked about spores from mushrooms possibly coming in this very same way from space, and that the spores from the mushrooms that they created mushrooms that were mind expanding on Earth, and thereby widened our.
No, I'd not heard of that. That's interesting, because I just looked at the internet before you contacted me, and there's some work saying that morning glory seeds can survive in space.
Wow.
Survive high levels of UV. Now, morning glory, of course, as you possibly know, is an hallucinogen.
Yes, indeed.
Some people take it like LSD. We could be careful, I might add.
Got to take an awful lot of it, though. LSD comes.
Yeah, you've tried. You've obviously tried a few pounds, yes.
I tried 2 or 3 seeds, and absolutely nothing happened. I'm not ashamed to say.
Yeah. Well, so they're saying that maybe morning glory seeds came from through panspermia. I don't know about this. I mean, we concentrate on microbes. See, the great thing about microbes is they're small, and they can be protected from, if they're covered in cosmic dust, or if they're in a meteorite, they can be protected from UV and radiation. And the other thing is, microbes have an extremely rapid reproduction rate. So you can imagine, let's just have a scenario where the Earth is just cooling to the point where life is possible, can exist on the planet, the new planet. One single proto-life form, or a single bacterium, or a single one of these entities, if it lands, it reproduces every 20 minutes. Now, by the law of doubling, which you know about, I guess, within a month or 6 months, the whole of the surface of the Earth would be covered in these life forms. Imagine that. Wouldn't take long, because there's no competition. There's nothing to eat them. They've got plenty of nutrients. They just double, they double, they double, they double, and so on. And by 6 months, the whole of the surface, say if they were green, for example, would be coated in green life. And that could then evolve. It could perhaps interact with life that formed. I mean, the possibility is that 2 things happened. You should never be mutually exclusive. Maybe life did form on the Earth, and maybe life was supplemented from life coming in. You know, the 2 are not mutually exclusive. But you can imagine how quickly they would develop if this happened.
Have you tried to grow like colonies of these on some sort of? No.
Well, like I said, we're very much big. One of the problems we have, we're limited by techniques. With our microscope, we have to cover the surface with gold so that we can image the images. Now, once they're covered in gold, of course, we can't grow them. Mm-hmm. So if we want to see them, we can't grow them, and if we grow them, we can't see them. So there's a problem here. But there are other microscopes around the world which could do this. Now, I'll tell you a very interesting story. One of the things we want to do is what's called an isotope fractionation. Now, an isotope fractionation is basically saying that, say, carbon has a different isotope ratio on Earth from microbes in space. This is what we theorized. So if you could do a carbon or another element isotope fractionation on the organisms we're finding, and you may find a different ratio, so this would demonstrate, excuse me, that they're coming from space. Now, we don't have this machinery. It's very expensive and complicated. And on 2 or 3 occasions, I've contacted laboratories, and friends of mine have contacted laboratories around the world, Cambridge, for example, and they've said, okay, we can do this. We'll do it next month or so. And in all cases, just before they're supposed to do it, I get an email saying, sorry, we can't do it. And in all cases, it's because generally the head of the institute has said, we're not getting involved in this work. Because they are worried it will attack their funding. As you know, science is all about funding. Now, if you get associated with these cranks who are saying life comes in from space, it'll give the institute a bad name. So again, this is not special pleading. This is happening. So it's quite amazing that, you know, this wonderful freedom that we expect from science is not happening. Why?
I think it comes down to money. But what interests me most about these things that you have found, most of them do have carbon and oxygen and nitrogen.
Yeah.
And have you looked, were there other elements present or just those?
Well, I mean, never say never, but if you're a biochemist, and I give lectures on this to my students, you would say that all life, by definition, is carbon-based.
Right.
You cannot, I mean, you know, unless there's some kind of weird chemistry that we don't know about, and who knows, life is based on carbon. So we would expect life elsewhere in the cosmos to be carbon-based. You know, the science fiction writers talk about silicon-based life. Well, silicon that's nonsense as far as we know. I keep on kind of adding the caveat that as far as we know, because as a heretic, I don't want to suggest that, things are limited by my mind. But as far as we can tell, silicon, for example,
it just couldn't.
Very much like glass, it won't form organisms like we know.
It just
can't be a source of energy as far as we know. So silicon's out of the picture.
Yeah, it is. But you also hint that there's a hint of a DNA type structure?
Well, we are finding DNA in the stratosphere.
Oh, that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would expect. I mean, there's got to be some information system. And, you know, a number of people are saying, well, maybe on Earth even there's a different type of information that's not DNA. Now, I don't know how they're ever going to demonstrate this, because if you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to find it? But some people are making a lot of noise about this idea. But I am kind of conservative about this. I think life forms around the cosmos would be based on carbon. They would be based on DNA, and they would essentially be what we expect to find here, but different, obviously. They'd be modified by their conditions in which they're living in.
Now, I want to just ask you about another scientist's work that you may be familiar with, and I'm not asking you to critique it as give it a good or bad, but just kind of what do you think about what he's done? And I'm talking about Dr. Richard Hoover in the U.S., and the crinoid fossils he seems to think he found on the moon.
I know
Mars. Go ahead.
I know Richard in a lot of his talks in the States mainly, and I will critique him. His work's amazing. And again, this is the kind of work that people should be taking seriously and repeated. As you know, this man was kicked out. He'd retired and he was working with NASA and producing these amazing images of fossilized, these are not living organisms, these are fossilized organisms in meteorites. And to a microbiologist, these images are amazing. But the people, again, poo-pooed them. I don't think they look at the evidence. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction, and they completely ignore it. Now, every time I go to one of these lectures, I just come out gobsmacked. I'm just amazed by what he shows you, and yet it doesn't register in the norm. You know what I mean? It's kind of... I just can't understand the disconnect.
Really?
Maybe people aren't listening. Maybe they don't want to listen. Maybe, but it's very good, extremely good work, and he should be praised for it, not criticized.
Well, there was apparently what looked like a fossil on Mars, but the rover. Sorry about that. The rover found it, and then they destroyed it. Are you?
Yeah, I don't know about. I mean, obviously, I read about all these conspiracy theories. I don't like to get involved too much in conspiracy theories because I've got enough on as it is.
Yes.
And where can you find the proof unless? I mean, I think there's one of the things that always amazes me. I've written letters to the London Times about this. Is that NASA is sending these expensive rovers to planets and to comets, etc., and they're not looking for life. Now, why are they not looking for life? Any microbiologist can tell them how to find life if they will. I mean, they did this in the 1970s with the Viking mission, and of course, there are people who suggest. Gil Levin, for example, suggests that they did demonstrate life on Mars, and they kind of overlooked it, if you want to use that expression. Now, I don't know why NASA. Maybe it's political. Maybe it's kind of something to do with the religious right. I don't know. I'm not party to what they get up to, but I would have thought that they should spend more time looking for life on other planets. They're working now on water. Follow the water. If you find water, you may have life. Well, the argument to that is, well, you found the water, but maybe there's not life. So why not look for the life? And this really, as you can imagine, as you can hear from the tone of my voice getting excited, I get really annoyed about this because I think American taxpayers who are funding NASA want to know one thing about the cosmos: is there life?
Right.
And they're using all this taxpayers' money not to look for life. Now, why is that? I don't know.
Well, I certainly want to know. I'm among the American taxpayers who want to know. What about you, Kate?
I would definitely but I believe that there is life. So for me, it's not even a question. The old UFO specialist has no doubt, but that there's life elsewhere. I mean, if you just take the law of fractals alone, there has to be. I mean, but
Yeah. I mean,
so I don't think, and I really don't think you should waste a lot of your time and money arguing with skeptics. Just plow ahead with what you're doing and produce that one great paper, and then tell them all.
Yeah. Well, this is my attitude. I mean, I don't really care about what people say. I mean, it's very depressing, and it kind of
it does.
Like, I mean, there came a point when I thought I might be sacked from my university position.
Yeah.
And a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm not against special pleading, but the reality of this is the reality. If you try and do anything outside the box, to use that expression, you get a lot of trouble. And if you want to call me a heretic, heretics come in for a lot of problems. And I'm very interested in heretics, actually. I've done a lot of. I'm interested in the history of science, and I've done a lot of research on heretics. For example, Jacques Benveniste, The Memory of Water. This idea that water may have a memory that aids homeopathy, although he never actually linked it with homeopathy. Now, I went over to Paris, and I met this guy, and very, very charming. He's recently died, unfortunately. But he said, Milton, I can't understand this. He said, I was one of the top scientists in France, Legion of Honor or whatever, and then I did an experiment, and suddenly I'm a bad scientist. Why? Why am I a bad scientist? And this happens so many times.
I think it's just because science has become its own religion, and religion and politics always go hand in hand. And when you threaten the power structure, you're out.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, as you say, certainly money's a major factor. I mean, grants have always been a major factor in the United States. I mean, obviously, science is doing extremely well, so it does work. But in this country, we're getting more and more organized around money. For example, in my university and most universities in the UK now, and I find this obscene, young scientists are taken on, and if they don't get a big grant within 3 years, they're sacked. Now, the reason I think that's obscene is because, scientists have to develop. They have to mature.
Sure.
It's like saying to Leonardo da Vinci, if you don't come up with the Mona Lisa in 3 years, you're sacked.
Well, we agree with you on that idea that money has, while it has helped science, it has also in other ways destroyed the entrepreneurial single person working on something.
Well, they used to call them attic scientists, and I would say you're the classic example of one. You have an idea, you've proven it, and you've used just basic tools to do it.
Well, most of the major developments in science have come through serendipity, chance discoveries. If you try and plan to find a cure for cancer, chances are you won't find it. I can almost predict that someone will find the cause or a cure for cancer when they're looking for something else. They're working on, I don't know, spiders' knees.
Yeah.
And they work on spiders' knees and they find that, hey, this looks like cancer or something, That is how the most of the developments are made. But modern science goes against that. It wants to predict, it wants to control, organize. It becomes some kind of, organizational bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Mm.
Rather than this beautiful wonder of people just bumping into things,
For the purpose of curiosity, where curiosity takes you. Right now, I am afraid that our time with shattered reality is basically over.
I was just warming up there.
Well, we would love for you to come back on sometime. And if I was not an associate member, but a full member of the SSE, that is, if I were an accredited scientist, I would certainly invite you to one of those conventions, symposia.
I used to be a member, actually. I let my membership lapse. And, I used to go to a lot of conferences, and a lot of the time I was pretty well bored because I would hear the same old stuff. But I went to these conferences, and I would go, if they start at 7 in the morning, I'd go at 7, and I'd stay there until 10 o'clock because they're so full of amazing stuff.
It is.
Didn't always believe some of it, but it was unbelievable, fantastic range of very exciting ideas.
And to me, as well as a layperson, it's a very exciting event to go to and to have my thoughts broadened and meet a lot of wonderful guests for Shattered Reality.
Yeah. Now, to my mind, that's the kind of science that should be done more of. More money and more interest should go into it, and stop this kind of mundane inside-the-box stuff that people are doing.
Yeah, they're sort of glorified technicians and not really good investigators anymore.
There's an old English expression called journeymen. Do you know this expression?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
A lot of them are journeymen who are careerists. It's very. I'm an old man getting. I'm probably an old man got, but to me, science is a wonder. It's a fascination. It's beautiful. And often I see that it's turning into a regular churning out of the, the stock ideas and the stock responses. And it's very sad.
I agree. Well, we want to thank you so much for being on Shattered Reality Podcast. And our intentions are for you to prosper and to get some bodies in the plural out there to do replicate studies for you. And we couldn't wish that more. So,
well, if anybody wants to contact me for advice, I have no money, but we don't need a lot of money, but advice I'll certainly provide.
Well, thank you so much, and we're going to say goodbye now.
Yeah, Dr. Wainwright, thank you so much. I wish you best of luck in your future career.
I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So
that was interesting.
Really a wonderful.
I had a bunch of questions I would have liked to have asked him. We ran out of time. We'll have to get him back on.
We'll have to get him back on. Yeah.
But it'd be fascinating to think that they rained viruses, and that's what actually got rid of the dinosaurs.
It could have been.
But then I think the other question that would have come up would have been that if this much life forms are reigning constantly, we really should see a lot more different life forms today. But then maybe we do. Maybe we just haven't found them.
Well, the ones that originally may have come down when the Earth first cooled, as he had mentioned, they were able to prosper immediately because it was a fertile ground.
And they weren't eaten.
They weren't eaten. But today, many of these things could be eaten. And I'm going to have to write in our show notes who the fellow was whose name just escapes me, who speculated on spores coming in the same way. And I know that Sir Fred Hoyle speculated on that too. So we'll put that in the show notes. And I apologize for not remembering the gentleman's name at the moment. So what's coming up next for us?
Drum roll. May 20th and 21st, I believe.
Well, it's May 20th with the rain date of May 21st.
Okay.
We will be up at
beautiful downtown Pine Bush, yeah.
New York. And both Kate and I, Fahrusha, will be there, as well as our illustrious engineer, Mr. Bill. And we are...
Oh, no, Mr. Bill.
Oh, no. The microphone's off, Mr. Bill. Help.
But we'd love to see you there.
We
really.
would love to see you if you're in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania area. You should be accessible to this wonderful UFO.
It's sort of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
Good food.
And there's plenty of food, local vendors, and the Flying Saucer Diner, the Cup and Saucer, whatever it is up there. Wonderful places to be and be seen and wear your UFO costume if you like. I will just be my normal alien self, no costume needed.
Okay. All right.
So
I guess that's it.
Okay. So shall we say
goodbye from
Shattered Reality?
Cool.
Really is a fount of knowledge.
What was that?